There are two things you need to know about this story. First is the date. This story begins in 2007. Second thing you need to know is the word. That word is touch. In 2007, Apple launched the iPhone. It did not have a keyboard. It did not have a stylus. It only had glass. At that time, phones were meant to be used with buttons and a stylus if you're feeling fancy. Glass was not supposed to be the way, but Apple believed that people wanted something different. Steve Jobs wanted them to feel special. He wanted them to feel that they were touching the future, and he sold millions of that future. The iPhone sold like crazy. Samsung saw all of this closely, and after 3 years they struck back. 2010 was the year. The weapon was Galaxy. The screens were bigger. The feature list was long. The operating system was Android. It packed everything that Apple did not. And suddenly, Apple had a challenger. A challenger that looked similar but was very different. Apple had started a war and Samsung was here to fight. Both sides had different strategies. Apple stuck to 3 core principles: simplicity, elegance, and control. Samsung went wide: innovation, variety, and experimentation. Apple had iOS, a closed, smooth, and unified software. Samsung rode Android, an open, flexible, and chaotic software. Apple had a vision of how your phone should work. Samsung believed that you should decide how your phone works. Apple was the cult, and Samsung was the crowd. And so began the battle for your phone. A battle that lasted over a decade. A battle where every new launch was a clash of ideologies. Notch versus no notch. Ecosystem versus customization. Brilliance versus bulk. And soon lawsuits. Apple accused Samsung of copying. Samsung fired back. Billions were spent in courtrooms, but in stores, both kept selling. Apple sold the dream. It created desire. It convinced people that they needed an iPhone. Samsung sold phones. It gave people a choice. You can buy our top-of-the-line flagship, or you can buy our mid-range phone at half the price. And they kept adding more options. With each new launch, the pressure on Apple increased. They had to keep raising the bar, and that's exactly what they did. Year after year after year, they introduced innovations that others could. Touch ID, live activities, focus modes, satellite, SOS, dynamic island, MagSafe live activities, focus modes, things that made the iPhone. Meanwhile, Samsung kept expanding. They experimented with foldables, S Pens, tri-folding screens, sliding screens, multicams, telephoto lenses, under-display cameras, bezel-less screens. They even built a TV that looks like a painting. Some flops, some hits, but a lot of firsts. While Apple perfected their craft, Samsung diversified their portfolio. Today, when you look at Apple's smartphone business, there's very little to complain about. Sure, the entry-level iPhone could use an upgrade, but overall it's hard to argue with the results. 96 million iPhones were sold last year. Almost half of the revenue came from services. The profit margin is insane. One analyst says that Apple makes $8,600 per iPhone sold. One estimate says that Apple has made $4 trillion from the iPhone since its launch. $4 trillion. Think about that. Now compare that to Samsung. Last year, they sold almost double the phones. 253 million units sold. Almost all of them were profitable, but certainly not at the same level as Apple. Samsung doesn't break down the numbers, but analysts estimate that Apple's profit per phone is 5 times that of Samsung. 5 times. Apple sold fewer phones, but they made more money. Samsung sold more phones, but played in every price tier. So who really won the smartphone war? If we talk about units sold, Samsung clearly wins. If we talk about ecosystem, Apple wins. If we talk about innovation, both had their moments. But what about brand loyalty? A couple of interesting data points here. In America, 54% of iPhone users would consider switching. In Korea, that number is 47%. In China, 44%. These are important numbers because iPhones are status symbols. They're aspirational. A lot of people want one, but don't want to pay full price. So what do? They wait for the next generation iPhone to come out and buy an iPhone that's 1 generation old. Around 30% of iPhones are bought second-hand. So the real iPhone market is actually much bigger than what Apple reports. Also, a little more than 50% of people who bought an iPhone last year switched from Android. Half of them switched from other brands. most of them probably switched from Samsung. If we talk about phones as a product category, then Apple wins hands down. Yes, Samsung sells more phones, but Apple makes more money. If we talk about which brand sold more phones last year, Samsung does. But if we talk about sales this year, guess what? For the first time in many years, Apple is expected to sell more smartphones than Samsung. Bloomberg estimates 231 million iPhones this year. Samsung is expected to sell 220 million phones. This is a close call, but it's still a win for Apple. We can show you a lot of numbers, but you know what's the most important number? Zero. Zero is the number of new smartphones that Google has launched this year. Zero. Alphabet is giving up on competing in the hardware business. They're quitting the smartphone war. So what does this mean? Who really won the smartphone war? If we talk about sheer sales, then Samsung does. But if we talk about the dream, the desire, the aspiration, Apple clearly did. Apple sold the dream of owning the future. Samsung sold the future. But now it's time to rethink this story, because maybe neither company won the war. Maybe it's you who really won. You see, whether it was a notch or no notch, whether it was an Apple or Galaxy, whether it was iOS or Android, one thing is for sure. Every year these companies fought to bring you the best. Whether it was camera quality, battery life, processor speed, storage space, they kept improving. They kept trying to beat each other, and in the process, they made your life easier. Every year they tried to impress you with something new. Apple brought Face ID to the masses. Samsung brought big batteries and fast charging to the masses. Apple pushed Samsung to perfect foldable screens. Samsung pushed Apple to improve battery life. Apple introduced the world to live activities. Samsung added a bunch of new customization options. Apple worked on their cameras. Samsung added even more cameras. Apple brought satellite connectivity to phones. Samsung improved their water resistance. Apple introduced focus modes. Samsung introduced good value for money phones. And today you can choose from the widest range of phones ever before. All of this happened because Apple and Samsung kept fighting. Yes, they fought over patents. They fought in courts. They fought over which one is better. But most importantly, they fought to bring you the best. And you're the one who really benefited. So who really won the smartphone war? Maybe not Apple, maybe not Samsung. Maybe it's you. You're the one holding the phone. You're watching this on